This week in IT, Microsoft announces integration between Teams and Loop for recurring meetings, VMware Workstation is now free for everyone, and misconfigured Power Pages could leak your data. So stay tuned to find out more. Welcome to the show where I talk about everything connected to Windows, Azure, and Microsoft 365. Today's show is sponsored by Semperis. But before I get started, I've got a quick favour to ask you. About 78% of the people who watched last week's video weren't subscribed to the channel. Now, as we go live today, we're on about 10,230 subscribers, and I'd love it if we could push that up to 10,300 this week. So if you'd like to see this weekly news roundup from Petri.com, then please subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell notification to make sure that you don't miss out on the latest uploads. Microsoft announced this week that it's bringing Loop and Microsoft Teams closer together. They introduced a new feature that is going to be enabled for recurring meetings where there's between 2 and 50 participants. And how this is going to work is at the end of the meeting, the organizer will get a prompt to ask them essentially whether they want to create a Loop workspace dedicated for that recurring meeting where they can store shared files that have been shared by participants during each meeting. Now, this is going to work by essentially bringing a prompt at the end of the chat of a meeting, and the organizer will get the option to create the workspace or have Teams create the workspace for them essentially, and then they get to approve the files that have been shared during the meeting, whether they can be added to that workspace or not. Then everybody who attended the meeting gets an invitation to join that workspace. Now, at the moment, this is only enabled for recurring meetings and for organizers of those meetings, but Microsoft is hoping to expand this capability in the future so that not only organizers are able to kickstart this Loop workspace creation process. This seems like a good idea in principle, but I'm in two minds about it, just because you're creating another location essentially where things are shared that's not Teams, so you have to go looking for this information somewhere else, and my only worry about it is really finding it again in the future. So as I understand at the moment, this is implemented just by a link in the meeting chat once the meeting has concluded, and then of course the guests in the meeting get an invitation. But what happens in 2 or 3 weeks time and I want to find that information again in Loop, how and where do I find that link? Do I have to go back to that meeting chat and search for it? I think that's a little bit inconvenient. I think if Microsoft were to make a tab in the meeting where there's like a permanent link to this workspace, and I think that will be a bit better so that I don't have to go and search for it. My other question about this feature is, what about meetings that have external guests? Now, I haven't tried this. I know that Loop has in the last year or so added support for external guest users. The last time I tried to get this to work, I couldn't get it to work. Maybe there's something we need to enable in our tenant to make it happen. I don't know. And that's the only other worry I have about this feature in Teams. Is this going to work well with external guest users? Because at the moment, Teams in themselves, if you've got that meeting there and an external guest user, they lose access to the chat, for instance, once the meeting has finished. So that also presents a problem. So I think the devil is in the detail with all of this, and we'll see how that works out. What do you think about this closer integration with Teams and Loop? Microsoft taking data outside of a Teams meeting and putting it into a Loop workspace. Now, I know, for instance, that of course the Loop application can be integrated into Teams, so you're not exactly leaving Teams as such, but there's a context switch there involved nevertheless. Let me know what you think about that in the comments below. Before we move on to the next story, here's a quick message from today's sponsor, Semperis. Did you know that Active Directory is exploited in 9 out of 10 cyber attacks? Once cybercriminals control your Active Directory, it's game over. With access to AD, attackers can gain control of your entire network. And if AD goes down, business comes to a halt. And it's not just on-premises Active Directory that's under attack. Cybercriminals are targeting Azure Active Directory too. Attackers can gain entry in the cloud and move to on-premises identity systems or vice versa. To keep threat actors out, you need to find and fix Active Directory security gaps. Meet Purple Knight, your ally in defending against adversaries trying to breach your hybrid Active Directory environment. Purple Knight is a free Active Directory security assessment tool built by Semperis identity experts. With Purple Knight, you can spot Active Directory vulnerabilities before attackers do. Purple Knight scans your hybrid environment for hundreds of indicators of exposure or compromise, in both on-premises Active Directory and Azure AD. Purple Knight gives you an overall security score and prioritized remediation guidance for fixing AD security vulnerabilities. VMware announced this week that Workstation and Fusion are now going to be free for all users. So I think it was earlier this year or late last year they'd already announced that VMware Workstation was going to be free for consumers, but now that they're extending that to all kinds of customers, including commercial customers, and it's also going to apply to Fusion for those on a Mac. Now, VMware have said that for their commercial customers, they will honor any existing contract you have for Workstation until that ends, but once that ends then you'll be able to use it for free, but they have emphasized that there will be no support for Workstation. Now I know that when VMware was taken over by Broadcom, there was some worry about whether these products would even continue to exist, and I'm not sure exactly what game Broadcom is playing here with Workstation and Fusion, but if they're going to be free, well, that's great, providing that of course they're developed and the security of them is at least supported going forward so that we can actually install it and use it with confidence. A story that just broke in the last 24 hours or so is it was revealed, I think it was sometime this week, that about 1.1 million NHS workers' personal information was exposed by Microsoft Power Pages. Now, in case you're not aware, Power Pages is basically a system for allowing organizations to quickly build websites and then connect with the Microsoft Dataverse so that you've got access to all of your backend data. The only problem with that has been that it seems the default configurations, or maybe misconfigurations, because maybe IT workers not always correctly understanding exactly what it is that they're doing, has put some of that data at risk, as we can see with this NHS story this week. So experts have highlighted some specific vulnerabilities with Power Pages that all IT departments should be aware of. So for instance, excessive columns exposed to the web API, self-registration and login enabled by default, external users granted global read access, and lack of column security for sensitive data. So what is the advice coming out on the back of this story if you're using Power Pages? So you should be careful with the anonymous role in table permissions where that's assigned. You should enable column security for any sensitive data. You should enable obfuscation for any sensitive data in columns if security profiles are not enabled. And you should monitor and manage configuration through the Power Pages Admin Center. Now, I know that Power Pages is very widely used in government institutions, at least across Europe, and I guess it's used elsewhere quite frequently. So if you're using Power Pages, you should make sure you're checking your configuration to make sure that you're not exposing sensitive data to any of those vulnerabilities. If you found this video useful, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up, because it helps to get it seen by more people on YouTube. I'd like to thank again the sponsors of today's video, Semperis, and I'm going to leave another video on the screen for you now about all of the best new features in Windows Server 2025. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.